Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, USA Today NFL Wire site that covers the Arizona Cardinals. With me is my co-host from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, Seth Cox from, and we are, guess what, Seth? Episode 500, the big 500. It is our 500th episode since we started back in 2013. I don't remember at what point you came on because I had a few shows before you joined, but it's been a lot of episodes. We talked a lot, and it's in the last couple of years, of course, it's been a lot of losses as we get to talk about. The Arizona Cardinals losing 27-16 on Christmas Eve to the Chicago Bears, and the implications of that with the draft and all that. Seth, first of all, glad you had a great Christmas how weekend. Wasn't only just a Christmas weekend for Seth, who was also a birthday weekend as he gets a touch older. He's still what are you now? 30 what?
38. Yeah.
38. He's still a baby, still a little baby, but with not really because he's got kids graduate from high school and his kids are getting all big. He's reaching that next stage of life. Christmas, birthday, I'm assuming was a fantastic weekend. It was for me with all the family home.
Yeah, it's a great time to be with family, enjoy, all the things that we're fortunate enough to have here, and just being able to sit back, watch football, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and not have too much to worry about. It's kind of a blessing in and of itself, right? And we got to do that on Sunday, and then focus on family on Monday. And
well, because it was the first time in 3 years that we didn't have a game on Christmas Day. The previous two Christmases were games for the Cardinals, and well, that's kind of nice. It was definitely nice.
If we would have been paying attention, Jess, one of the bets we could have made was for the Cardinals to score 16 points, because apparently that's just all that they can score on Christmas or Christmas Eve, because the last three games they've scored 16 points. Man, that, by the way, those numbers, like when you look at those, and usually you have to bet both sides of the coin on that, but there are some sites where you can bet a single team's point total. And yes, if you would have bet 16, it'd probably been like plus 3,000.
It would have paid for your entire Christmas, right?
Right, exactly. Put $50 on it, win $1,500, and walk out of there going, "Hey, this is even with a loss, this was a great day." But yeah, it was a lot of fun to be able to hang out, watch football all day. And let's be honest, not to get too far off, but like yesterday was a surprisingly interesting. Good is probably not the right word because of what happened in the first game and half of what happened in the second game, but it was a very interesting day of football on Christmas in all three games. And let's be honest, going into yesterday, we were just really looking at San Francisco Baltimore as the only game worth a damn, and the Raiders came out, completed 1 or 0 passes in the final 3 quarters and beat the Kansas City Chiefs. And the Tommy DeVito experiment is over, and Tyrod Taylor's back in and led a furious comeback attempt that fell short against the Eagles. Those games were
my spread pick on all 3 games was good. So
yeah,
but and two. So the 2 of my 3 actual underdog picks were Raiders and the Ravens. So that was a good weekend because I'd been having kind of a rough streak on my underdog pick. So
well, and let's be honest, it was interesting. Interesting is probably not the right word. It was kind of ironic / funny to see the pumpkin that Brock Purdy turned into when all of those interceptable passes started turning into interceptions. He's like, hey, I've made that throw for 17 games or whatever, however many games he's played. And the Ravens are like, no, you can't do that against us. And isn't it just wonderful that the way that the 49ers even get on the board to start the game is a referee not in position, falls down and sacks Lamar. I mean, just could you imagine if the Ravens would have lost by 1 or 2? Like,
oh, that'd have been terrible.
But yeah, I was genuinely shocked at what, like, just kind of perusing the games until that Ravens 49ers game, which is the first one I kind of really paid attention to during the day, of like, what is happening?
Yeah, but we have to talk about this game, and we're just gonna take one segment on it because we got a few other things to talk about. But the game, 27-16. They fall behind 21-0. It was kind of a debacle in the beginning. Once again, the receivers play is it's not good. I mean, you got a 38-yard touchdown catch and run by Greg Dortch, but the defense. They got run over for 250 total yards, 8 for 15 on third down. 420 yards allowed. Justin Fields, they almost gave up 2 100-yard rushes as Khalil Herbert went for 112 and a touchdown, and Justin Fields went 9 for 97 and a touchdown. It was a disappointing game. I mean, disappointing in the fact that you thought they would be more competitive, and they even kind of got things kind of okay and kind of rallied towards the end. But anytime you fall behind 21-0, it kind of makes things, impossible, right? And it doesn't matter what you do. And the first thing I'm gonna say is this: like, you look, Kyler Murray, he's not the reason why they're losing. He's had a good season in the game, like aside from the Rams game and a couple of throws against Houston. Kyler's he's really been good, and he was statistically even better. He had a statistically best game, and he did it with almost no help at all.
Yeah, and it's just getting to the point where you're seeing that, we talked about it last week, and I think it just becomes obvious that there are needs on this team, and the biggest need is they just need playmakers, especially at the receiver position. And you look at what happened in this game and how this game played out in and of itself. And there was just, there were a lot of chances that they missed. Some of them were dropped, right? I mean, we saw Michael Wilson, we saw Trey McBride, we saw Greg Dortch before that great run, all have drops in this game. We saw Rondale Moore once again. He's kind of I was texting a buddy of ours, and Rondale and Greg Dortch, they're slot guys only. Like, they literally just don't have a singular offensive weapon that can win vertically outside of Trey McBride at this point. And he looked like he was hurting a little bit in this game. And those things all just kind of came to fruition. They continue to run the ball well, which is, I think everybody would agree that's a positive. Like,
yeah, there was a sad part because James Conner's streak of averaging 4 yards a carry came to an end, but we can also say that James Conner was pretty much the only bright spot in this game. 112 total yards from scrimmage, 12 carries for 45 yards, 5 catches for 67 and a touchdown. He continues to be, and he's not entering contract years, but he's entering the last year of his deal next year. When you want to chew up and spit out running backs, he's a guy that you have to, you now are in position that you have to extend him. because you know what's going to happen next is that the holdout's coming. And we don't want to talk about it later, but that if they don't take care of him this offseason, at least give him a little extra, then that's going to be a problem, because he's literally the only thing that's a bright spot on this offense, other than Trey McBride. And Trey McBride didn't have a good game, 6 catches for 31 yards. But you can take him away when you've got nothing else happening. And
that's just what it is. Like, there's just nothing else offensively that scares teams, and you're starting to see that play out. Like, if McBride's not making plays vertically, then they have nothing vertically, and they can just kind of load the box and sit on things. And that's what they were doing in this game. And, they ran I think 2 screens that popped for 10 plus yards, which is quite frankly baffling from this organization. I mean, doesn't matter who the head coach is. We've seen that screens just don't work. And so to see it work was exciting, but at the end of the day, a lot of it just comes down to they just lack the talent to compete. And like you said, a 21-0 hole is not something you can get out of with where your best playmakers on offense are running back and a tight end, because you just don't have enough time.
Yeah. And, we both got a good laugh out of this. One is they finally ended their sackless streak. Dennis Gardeck got a sack of Justin Fields, but it wasn't like a sack. It was, of all the ways to lose the sack, it was Justin Fields scrambled, got out of the pocket, and then ran out of bounds for no gain. Nobody hit him, and so Dennis Gardeck got credit for a sack. So they finally break the streak, but you've now gone 4 games where you haven't, tackled the quarterback for a loss.
And then they finally got one, and they called a very curiously timed and called defensive holding call that set up the Bears' first or second touchdown. I can't remember, but yeah, I mean, again, it's starting to come to fruition. I mean, you talked about it when I argued is probably a very strong statement, but you kind of opined on X Twitter that Zaven Collins is fine, but they got to find a guy that can rush the passer. And somebody said, to the extent of, well, why not move him back to inside linebacker? And it's like, he's your best run defender. Why would you move on the edge? Why, like, people, I don't know. I feel like sometimes people are just like, oh, well, he's good at stopping the run, so he should be able to do it from off the ball. It's like, no, part of the reason he's become so good at stopping the run from the edge is because he doesn't have to make decisions about which way to go downhill. Yeah. Like, so
him playing off the ball would be really timely right now.
Right, because they have no talent or ability off the ball. But
that was one very disappointing thing we got to see. It was cool. Owen Papo, their fifth round picks, he gets a start because he's now he lines up in base. Now most of the time, honestly, the Cardinals only run with one off the ball linebacker because they choose to go basically with the 5-man front, and they go basically with a big nickel with one linebacker and a third safety. But they started the game with Papo alongside of Chris Barnes. Papo did not look good. No. Boy's athletic, but man, he got out physicaled a lot.
So overwhelmed just physically, and another thing that we can lament, and something that it just feels like it shows up every single week, are missed opportunities, right? And the guy this week was Andre Chauchier. He played quite a bit. Their rotation was really interesting. You look at their defensive snap counts. Obviously,
Jalen back to the slot.
Yeah, Jalen and Buddha were at the top. You had Starling Thomas and Antonio Hamilton, as with Garrett Williams out, which is something we'll get to in a little bit. Garrett Williams out, and then you had Chris Barnes played 69 of 70 snaps. But from there, it was, a mishmash, right? You had Dante Stills and Zaven Collins playing in the 40s. Then you had Chauchier And you had Chaucier getting some snaps at strong safety as well, because like you said, they were playing Jalen in the slot because they were just, I mean, when you have no corners, that's what you do. But so I don't know if you remember this play or not, but Chaucier had a great opportunity to have a pick six. It kind of changed the entire momentum of the game, and he just drops the ball. And it's always, this is what's always interesting to me, you know, and we like PFF, the whole idea of like somebody grading something, and Chaucier gets a really positive grade for that. And it's like, I get,
because he made a play on it's a pass break, but
right. But it's like, that's actually a missed opportunity, because instead of being a pick six and all of a sudden the game changes momentum, you're just talking about a pass breakup that leads to a punt. Like nothing. And so those are the things that get to me. And it's kind of, you know, how you and I have always talked about hurries, right? Or you know, or pressures, or whatever you want to call them. Like, it's fine to get pressures, but eventually you have to get a sack too, because those pressures only matter if they turn into negative plays. And when you're playing a guy like Justin Fields or Kyler Murray, those pressures, you know, usually don't lead to negative plays. They actually lead to positive plays for the. And so, yeah, I mean, it's great when you're playing Clayton Tune, right? And that's not to take a shot at Clayton, but like, it's great when you're playing a Clayton Tune. It's great when you're playing, you know, a Kenny Pickett, a Mitch Trubisky. But when you're playing guys like Justin Fields, even if they're not great passers, like they make so many plays, and it's just, yeah. And it's just interesting to look at, because this is just such a hodgepodge team, right? You've got BJ Ojulari, who's, you know, hopefully the best all-around edge player you have, but you have, you know, Zaven Collins, who's, we talked about, probably their best run defending edge player. And then you have Dennis Gardeck, who's their best edge rusher, but you can't have them on the same field all the time. So like, if you're playing against that team, if you're playing against the Cardinals and Zaven Collins is on the field, you want to try to throw the football, right? Because that's putting the Cardinals at a disadvantage.
And you see Gardeck, you're going to run at him.
Right. And so it just becomes this problem of like, you can't even play the chess match, because your chess pieces are all, you know, all knights. Like, if you put all knights out there, yeah, you have the ability to move differently than the pawns and the, you know, the the castles and you know, the rooks and the bishops, but like, you don't have the ability to move in different ways. And that's just what the Cardinals do. It's like, hey, we have this knight and we have this knight, but we don't have anything else. So like, you know, we cannot take advantage of matchups, and that's just where you're starting to see it. Like, I hate saying that they lack the talent, but that's really what it is. They lack the all-around talent. Like, they have the situational talent outside of the defensive line, which is just a you know, a nightmare of nightmares. That, I mean, you and I have covered you've covered this team longer than I have, but you and I have covered this, like you said, 10 years. I have never seen anything like this in terms of just injuries. Like, it's just one of the most baffling things I've ever seen. And you just, I mean, at some point, it's just too much to overcome.
It's been comical defensively. Now, it's there. If there's one thing, we've seen this on the offensive line, and thank goodness that this year the offensive line has been intact, with the exception of left guard. And that's really been a blessing to the quarterbacks this year. There's one thing I wanted to complain, and I complained about it on Twitter, and I had a few analytics people come at me. I will fight anyone. I'm like, yeah, I understand the analytics. When the Cardinals scored that touchdown to bring them in with 8, I could not believe why in heaven's name they would go for 2. when they've been so bad at it. And I guess I get it. I get the analytics behind it, but
Here's the thing.
I think it's the wrong decision. Like, why do you chase points like that?
But you can even say you get the analytics. As somebody that, and again, my coaching is 1,000% different than NFL coaching, but as somebody that coaches actively, like, I don't understand it, because at the end of the day, the one thing that, whether I'm the head coach and calling plays or talking to my kid's high school coach, who's one of the better coaches in the state, and I have to remind him at times, like, you don't want to chase points early. And that's what they did. Like, if you miss that extra point, let's just say they kick it, Matt Prater misses, right? It's little windy, little moist in Chicago. Bad kick, he misses it. Now they're down 8. Okay. You score again. Let's just say there's 4 minutes left in the game. Chase those points, right? Because at that point, then you're either tied or you're down 2. So it's not a, huge deal, right?
Yeah.
But that juncture in the game, over 8 minutes left in the game, I don't get it. And I get
the numbers behind it, but at the same time, I'm like, I still don't get situations. It doesn't make sense. I'm like,
it doesn't.
Why do you count? Like, I much rather take the sure points and then in the situation, if you've got, I guess the analytics doesn't believe in momentum, but you go down to score and you're now down 1 point, you have the decision to kick the extra point or go for 2 for the win.
But Jess, that's always going to be the issue with analytics, is that there's never anybody that actually has to
well, that's also
actually has to make that decision, because they're saying, oh, look, these are what the numbers are telling us.
Right. But that you're also looking at, here's the thing I talk about, like, you expect, you're assuming a 50% conversion rate on your 2-point conversions, which I get numerically makes sense, but then you have to believe that your team is league average, and we all know that this team is not league average.
Well, and especially like you said with 2-point plays, they're what now, 2 or 3
for 12.
Now,
yeah, 3 for, I know that's a small sample size, but when you're looking at analytics, that's assuming like league average. Is this team a league average team? No, it's not. Do not assume that at any point.
Yeah, at anything. Unless you're going to say, hey, this team is league average at running the football, then no, they're not league average at anything. And so, yeah, I mean, that's my problem with analytics in a nutshell. Is it's in a box. It's a binary set of numbers, and I get that's what the whole thing is supposed to be, is it doesn't take into account any outside variables. But we live in a world of outside variables, so we have to take those variables into account in every situation. And in this situation, it just didn't make sense. It just didn't. And in the end, it didn't matter. I mean, they didn't score again, so it doesn't.
But it felt like, if you're a believer in momentum, it did feel like it took kind of some of the wind out of the sails, because then you knew, you're like, oh, we have to get a touchdown and a 2-point conversion to tie. Plus, they had to get a stop, but that's another story. They hadn't.
Isn't it amazing too that they can get 1 to 2 stops a game, but it always seems that in an innocuous time, it's like, hey, we really need to stop here, and they're like, nope. Sounds like something. Yeah, it sounds like a you problem, not a us problem.
Right, and like, in fairness, like we knew going into that it was going to be a hard game to defend. We just thought that the Cardinals were going to operate better offensively, and they just did not. I mean, in the end, Kyler had a good statistical game. He didn't turn the ball over. He threw a pair of touchdown passes. James Conner played well. You got some production from Amari DiMercato, but just the receivers, and while it was more, they ended up with 4 catches for 75 yards. One of those 38 yards came on one play, and I call that the Brock Purdy, right? Like, that was, you threw a 4-yard pass play
that was designed in that situation. It's 3rd and 8. You run a 4-yard drag route, a mesh concept, and you throw that. There's nobody there, so he's going to pick up the first down easy, and he makes the other, what was it, 39-yard touchdown, 38-yard touchdown?
38, yeah.
Yeah, he makes the other 34 yards. Well, we won't even say that. He was going to gain about 10 yards before he even made, touch of the first defender. So the last 28 yards were all Greg Dortch. I mean, and that's what bothers me about in general about quarterback statistics is it's like it looks really good that Kyler threw a 38-yard touchdown. And don't get me wrong, it was a great play, but at the end of the day, it's like Kyler threw a 4-yard, drag route that Greg Dortch did all the work on. And we saw that in the Sunday night game of like, hey, sometimes those plays aren't there, so you have to make plays, and that didn't happen for Brock in that game. And that's one of the things that we haven't seen. And I go back to this, there's a lot of negatives from the game, a lot of positives from the game, but I go back to this. You have three throws in this game to 3 different players, one of which is supposed to be kind of your best guy in Trey, right? Like he's supposed to be the guy. And that was just an easy drop. Like that was, there was no excuse for that. That killed I think it was the first drive of the game too. That killed the momentum on the first drive, right? And then you had 2 throws by Kyler that were just preposterous. And I think I said Michael Wilson earlier. I meant Rondell Moore. You had 2 throws that were just preposterous by Kyler that you're just like
preposterously good. He means, by
the
way.
Oh yeah. They were just. I mean, like you just look at them and you're like, holy crap! Like that's why you're like, okay, like we've talked about the mechanics of the contract and all of that, like, but that's the other reason why you're like, hey, let's see if we can get this guy some help out of guys that will catch those footballs, because the one he made to the Rondell and then the one he made to Greg Dortch were just so absurdly, needle threading throws that you're just like, who, like you said, whether it's the analytics or momentum, you look at it and you go, who knows what happens if they actually catch those balls?
Right. Like, so to accentuate the receiver problems, we're going to look at the numbers of their supposed 3 best receivers on this team. Hollywood Brown, Michael Wilson, Rondell Moore. Combined over the last 3 games, they have 5 catches for 41 yards. All of them come from Rondell Moore over 3 games. It's hardly impactful. Obviously, Wilson missed one of those 2 games. He's catches in 2 games. Hollywood went 2 games without a catch and then missed this game. But that just woefully inadequate. There is not a quarterback in the NFL, not a single one, who could succeed with production from their top 3 wideouts like that, period.
Well, and we're seeing it. We're seeing it play out in live time. I mean, we're seeing the best quarterback of this generation, Patrick Mahomes, look average to, I mean, God forbid we say it because he is just so freaking good, but below average. I mean, his game against the Raiders yesterday was just so bad. And his last 4 games, he has 5 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. I mean, that's just not anything we expect. And by the way, they're 1-3 in those games. They've lost to Green Bay, Buffalo, and Vegas, and they beat New England 27-17. Like, he's just looked awful. Jalen Hurts, who without a doubt has one of the best offensive personnel groups in the NFL. You go back, his last 4 games, he has 2 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. In 2 of those games, he's thrown for less than 200 yards. In one of those games, he's thrown for less than 150 yards. And again, the Eagles are 1-3 in those games. Like, we're just seeing that the quarterback position is played at on such a week-to-week basis that, and I've said this before, you have Patrick Mahomes, and then every year 2 through 13 just, it changes. Just depends. This year it's like, I don't even think anybody knows who the top quarterback is this year. I mean, it was Mahomes, it was Purdy, it was
Lamar,
Dak Prescott,
it was
Lamar's, Josh
Hurts,
Allen,
yeah.
like you've got all these guys, and none of them you'd be like, I mean, like I said, the last 4 weeks, you look at it and you go, is this guy really the best quarterback in the NFL? And it makes it difficult because you look at it and go, I'd love for more consistency, higher level playmaking, whatever it is that you're looking for. But at the same time, it's like, I've seen the other side. I've seen Josh Dobbs and Clayton Tune. Like, we've seen Sam Bradford and Josh Rosen,
Max
and
Hall and Derek Anderson.
And I get the idea of, I've said it all along, scared money don't make money. But at the same time, it's like the way the league is going, the highest paid quarterbacks this year. And I said this the other day, like, what right now, and this isn't, again, like, there's no debate, even on this Arizona Cardinals show, there's no singular debate about whether or not Patrick Mahomes is better than Kyler Murray. There's no debate. But over the last 4 weeks, what has Patrick Mahomes done better than Kyler Murray? And that's where I'm like, you have to be very, very careful with how you're just pick up and move on. And like you and I said, like, I don't think that there's a scenario where they move on from after this year, because of it really cuts off the whole rebuild idea, just because if you do move on for any reason, you can't keep him on the roster. You can't keep Kyler Murray on the roster. And then you
don't have any cap space.
Right. So you're accelerating cap space, and now you're using that asset that we're about to talk about. You have that number 2 overall pick. And yes, you're using it on a player, and you're hoping he turns out to be CJ Stroud and not Bryce Young. But you have nothing else on top of that, because all of a sudden you can't trade that pick, or you can't add that pick to other things, because you have to use that on a quarterback. And that, again, if you get CJ Stroud, yeah, maybe that takes you to a 500 team next year. But then you're talking about a whole nother can of worms, right? Because now you're like, oh, now you don't have a high draft pick, and you're 500, and you need to improve somehow. And so, like, I just feel like, as we'll talk about shortly, that even though I would say mediocrity that we've seen from Kyler Murray this year, he's been very average. It shows me enough that if you get more around him, that you can put him in a better place and a chance to succeed next year. And then if that doesn't work out, then you have the assets, ideally, to be able to move on without handicapping yourself in free agency as well.
Absolutely. Coming up next on the Rise Up Zero podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web, let's talk about their draft position, because it's gotten better. That's coming next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Over the Christmas weekend, the Cardinals were given 2 gifts and almost a third. In either case, they now, thanks to a win by the New England Patriots over the Denver Broncos on Sunday night, last second field goal. Granted, this was a game the Patriots were clearly ahead of, and then petered away their win, their lead, and then won it on a last second field goal. They now are behind the Cardinals and the Commanders. The Patriots move from number 2 to number 4 in the draft order. The Cardinals are now the only 3-win team in the NFL. The Panthers darn near won that game and almost got to 3 wins as well. The Bears, who have the Panthers pick, are number one because the Panthers have 2 wins. The Cardinals have 3 wins. The Patriots and the Commanders each have 4 wins, and the Commanders almost pulled the cup. They were getting their pants whooped off. They were getting the pants beat off them by the New York Jets, and they came back, had a lead only to give it up in the last minute, which would have put the Cardinals in a really good spot because they would have been ahead of the Patriots. They'd be a game like they'd have a 1 fewer win than the Patriots and 2 fewer wins than the Commanders. We've been wanting the Commanders to win because it gave them some space to breathe to still have the 3rd pick, even if they messed up and won a game. They also got some help by the fact that the Cleveland Browns hammered the Houston Texans, although the Texans' pick did not move. They are now 8-7. They have the 16th pick. If they can get one more loss, that'll probably, well, they're still in contention in the division, but they've got a couple of division games coming up. So the Cardinals now have the number 2 pick, and their final 2 games, it almost guarantees, because it would take them winning their final 2 games, and they've not won 2 games in a row all year, against the defending NFC champions in the Philadelphia Eagles and then the Seattle Seahawks, who are currently a playoff team. If they don't win a game the rest of the way, we know they're number 2. We basically know that they're in a position where they will win. They will be no lower than 4th overall, and that really puts them in the position because they play the Eagles and the Seahawks. Washington, they have the 49ers and the Cowboys left on their schedule, although they could pull an upset this weekend. They could do it because Purdy's banged up right now. Trent Williams is banged up right now. They have like 3 offensive linemen that are hurt, so we'll have to wait and see how that goes. That might be a helpful game for the Cardinals, and then the Patriots to close out their season. They play the Bills and the Jets, and they could mess around and win. Definitely one of those games. They could beat the Jets for sure. So the Cardinals are in a very, very, very good position. Although, do you think it'd be better for them to be 3rd overall? Because if you figure that the first 2 picks are going to be quarterbacks, if you're at number 2, which means you're likely going to trade back, you don't want to trade back so much that you lose out on Marv. I mean, that's what we're all talking about right now. Although, Seth, you have a scenario that kind of plays out. I'll let you talk about that. It's draft season, and we're not calling for the tank. It's just playing out that way because the Cardinals aren't very good. I wanted to see the Cardinals win one more game. I just didn't think it was going to happen.
Yeah, and you look at it, and like you said, there's some scenarios that can play out. Number 2 puts them in an intriguing position because it puts the onus right now on other teams to give them what they want. And what I mean by that is either you give the Cardinals a reason to move down, let's say no lower than 7, right? So you give the reasons to the Cardinals from 2 to 7 or 2 to 4 or whatever. And then you go, okay, if Marv ends up at 4, let's say they trade with the Patriots, who are the 4th pick right now, then you get the best of both worlds. Whereas like you trade down and Marv goes 3, then, and even in that scenario, you could call Washington, unless the Commanders are dead set on taking Marvin Harrison Jr., you can say, hey, we'll give you, 4 and the extra 3rd round pick we got in 2025 to move up to 3 and take Marvin Harrison, and then you still end up with that extra 1st round pick from the New England Patriots or
and
whatnot.
Commanders ideally still get the quarterback, assuming they're going to go with quarterback at this point.
Yeah, you would think that they'd have to, and so that's the other question: is Jaden Daniels, is Bo Nix, or whoever the quote unquote 3rd quarterback is, are they worth that? And that's where the question starts to come into play. For the Cardinals, I think there's a couple things that you look at. The first thing with that second pick is, obviously if you desire, and we've kind of laid out the reasons why we wouldn't go that way, but it doesn't mean anything. We're just guys on a podcast. If you desire to draft a quarterback, you get one. If you don't, and you say, hey, we understand that the trades will be there, but the reality is we can't pass on Marvin Harrison Jr. or Olo Fashanu or Joe Alt or whatever the name you want to throw there is. We can't leave to chance. So unless the Washington Commanders give us something, we can't go down to even 4 because we have to be able to get our guy, whoever that guy is. But I think just being at 2 gives you more options because that guarantees you one of the top quarterbacks is there. Whereas if you're at 3, you can't guarantee one of the top quarterbacks is there. And you basically are putting yourself in a position where you say, and I get that you're doing that with 2 as well, but is Marvin Harrison Jr. worth X? We talked about the Will Anderson decision last year. I think Will Anderson is still the best player from the 2023 NFL draft. I think he's a phenomenal player. But you look at what they got in return, and if you end up getting, Paris Johnson Jr., and let's say they add, just throw a name out there who's at the consensus at 16, Jared Verse or Chop Robinson or, who's the J.C. Latham or the big guy out of Oregon State. Can't remember his name. Talisi Fuaga, right? Like if you end up with those 2 guys, are you going to be like, oh, I can't believe they didn't get Will Anderson? No, I mean, Will Anderson's great. But like if you end up being able to get a starting tackle and a starting edge or 2 starting tackles, I think everybody walks away going, that was a good trade. Like well worth the trade. So those are the scenarios. And right now, like I've said, on the consensus big board from NFL mock draft database, it's Jared Verse. So like if you walk away from that Texans trade with Paris Johnson Jr. as your, left or right tackle moving forward, and then Jared Verse as your top edge rusher, I think you go, hey, that's a good trade. And I know people will go, well, all right, let's compare Jared Verse to Will Anderson. Okay, Will Anderson's better. I don't think anybody's really going to say that. Doesn't mean that he'll be a better pro or have a better career or anything of that nature. But he, as a prospect coming out, there's no question Will Anderson Jr. is better. But is he better than Paris Johnson Jr. and Jared Verse? And that's kind of how you have to look at it. So that's just kind of where I'm at with it. I've run through some scenarios, and the one that keeps popping up now is the Cardinals sitting at 2, right? The Cardinals sit at 2, and the first team that calls is the New England Patriots. So if you are the Cardinals and you're sitting with the second pick in the draft, and the Patriots call and say, hey, we have the 4th pick, and you go, okay. And they say, we'll give you 1 and 34, or 36, excuse me. 34 is a Cardinals pick. 36. Okay. Well, throw in next year's one. They're going to be like, yeah, it's a little too much. Okay. So let me ask you this. You go 1 and 80 or 81, whatever the Cardinals extra 3rd round pick that was from Houston. So you go 1 and 80, but you get 4, 36, next year's 1st and next year's 3rd. I think you do that every time. And then you just kind of let the draft fall as it may, right? Like, okay, Marvin Harrison goes 3rd. Now all of a sudden you have Joe Alt, you have Olo Fashanu, you have Malik Neighbors, and you have the kid out of UCLA, Latu, the edge rusher. And then you've got the top interior defensive lineman and corners available. Like, At 4, you're still talking about you have the number one player at every position, sans wide receiver. And I told this to Jess off the air. Malik Neighbors is 100 times out of 101 times he's wide receiver 1 in a draft. He's just going up against a guy that is on a plane of Calvin Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald in terms of prospect status in Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, Malik Neighbors is a guy that you look at in every other year and you go, oh man, this guy is a phenom, lock top, 5-10 pick. And he's the second best wide receiver in this class. That's just how good Marvin Harrison Jr. is. It's not a shot by any means at Malik Neighbors. So, I think obviously 1's the most ideal because you control the draft completely. But I don't think 2 is a bad spot to be in, especially with who follows you. Like you said, the Commanders, the Patriots, and the Giants. All 3 of those teams probably need a quarterback.
Yeah.
And so you could look at it and say, hey, 5's the limit of how low we'll go. And then you don't have to worry about it, because if a team's coming up for the Williams or May, whoever's number 2, you are guaranteed one of Olu Fashanu, Marvin Harrison, Joe Alt, Malik Neighbors, or Laiatu Latu. Like you're guaranteed, like there's 0% chance that you won't get one of those guys. And then you just have to trust that Monty is going to make the right pick. And I think that's just I think that's an ideal scenario to be able to have the ability to say, oh, we're going to take the best player in the draft, which again is Marvin Harrison Jr., or we're going to trade down and not take ourselves out of the range for potentially the best player in the draft or the top, premium position, tackle, edge, corner, wide receiver. Like we still have those choices that we can make. And I just don't think you can really go wrong with that while you continue to kind of build, because that's the biggest thing that we have to look at. And by the way, for anybody that wants to move on from Kyler, that is the scenario you're hoping for, is that they get 2, they trade down to 4 or 5, pick up whoever it is, New England's, New York Giants, whoever it is, their first round pick next year. And then even if you just end up with, let's say the Cardinals end up at 7 and 10 next year, which right now would have them, picking in the 10 to 13 range. And then the Patriots in this scenario end up at 8 and 9. So they're picking in the 16 to 18 range. If you end up with 13 and 16, guess what? It's a lot easier to go get number 2, right? Or number 1 for the top quarterback in next year's draft and move on. And like we said, all of a sudden you still have your cap space. You were able to put the team together and then go get the final product of whatever it needs to be. Whereas right now they're definitely, I don't think anybody would argue with this. They're definitely still in the stage of they have to build. They have to continue to build.
Oh my gosh.
Because they just lack so much talent all over.
Coming up next on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best of Cardinals Talking Web, we will wrap up. We'll talk briefly about a roster move that happened on Tuesday. That's coming up next on Rise of Sierra. We're back on the Rise of Sierra podcast, Best of Cardinals Talking the Web. Cardinals made a roster move that was probably predictable to be coming around at this point. They released Marco Wilson, getting rid of yet another Steve Keim draft pick. There was a time, if you remember, Seth, that if there was any player that we could point to as kind of Steve Keim as an evaluator, it was this one, because he looked at Marco Wilson and he said he's got top cornerback potential, and he went up to trade him. He believed that he was the steal of the draft, and rookie year, last year he was pretty fine, like he was not bad. And then this year, he started and played almost every snap of the first 11 games of the season, then was benched, hasn't played a defensive snap. He still, even in those 11 games, allowed the fourth most receiving yards in being targeted in the NFL. And it being relegated to a special teams player, they're set to bring back Bobby Price, who's a much better special teams player than Marco Wilson. So I guess this was always going to happen. But yeah, it closes the book on yet another Steve Keim draft pick.
Yeah, and it's just sad that that's how these things are tending to play out for them, because one of the things we've talked about more than anything is that they just need one of these guys to work out, and it's just continually not right. Like you're continually being disappointed in how these situations and scenarios are playing out, and for the Cardinals, they need a Tariq Woolen. Like they need to hit on Tariq Woolen. For those of you that aren't familiar, Tariq Woolen was with a 5th round, I think, corner for the
Seahawks out of what is it?
For the Seahawks, yeah, out of UTSA. Like they desperately need one of the, and Ambry Thomas, the 3rd round pick out of for the 40. Like they need to hit on one of those guys, and they just. And obviously we hope that Garrett Williams will be, but as I kind of alluded to earlier, man, wasn't the writing on the wall this week when Garrett Williams is out with the knee inflammation, and Marco Wilson and you and I played the same amount of defensive snaps. I mean, like that was just one of those scenarios where you look at it and you go, oh man, like they straight up are just done with this dude.
Do you think that Marco will land somewhere and turn his career around, or did we already see the best of Marco's career?
I don't want to say that we've seen the best, because I always want a guy to succeed. And I think Marco's biggest issue, and I wrote about a little bit today, is that guy's got one of the best toolboxes in the league, but he just has no idea what tool to use at any time. And that makes it really difficult to be a good player, right? Like, we talked about Keontae Ingram. We talked about these guys that are just all athleticism, that even in college, you can kind of get away with being just an elite athlete. At the NFL level, almost everybody's an elite athlete, but if they're not an elite athlete, they're an elite technician, and they're so coached up, and they do such a good job. And I think that's just kind of where it frustrating, probably not the right word, but like a guy like Marco, it's just disappointing, because he was a guy that was afforded every opportunity. And I think there will be, a group of people that look at this and say, well, why didn't they do this, right? Or that, or the other. But you look at it, I mean, you're talking
a lot of patience with him earlier in this season. A lot of patience.
Yeah, and he just is a guy that just doesn't seem like it has clicked for him, which doesn't mean it won't. I mean, it doesn't at all. But when you look at corners in this league, it's hard. It's the hardest position to play in the NFL, especially as the rules continue to evolve in favor of offenses, right? Like it's almost impossible to be a cornerback in today's game. And, as somebody that, and again, I'm talking an 8th grader versus an NFL player, but as somebody that has a kid that is literally in the midst of trying to become a corner and wants, and is out there competing and learning, like the game is so difficult now for these poor kids. And I go back and I look at, Marco this year, 11 games played on defense, played in 15, but, the last 4 have been special teams only. 11 games played on defense. He's allowed 727 yards. Like, that's an absurd number for a third-year corner.
Yeah.
You go back to his rookie season, which admittedly was not great, right? And in 13 games, he allowed 588. You go back to last season where, you mentioned it. It looked like he was starting to improve, like starting to kind of come around, and he allowed 546. So in 3 less games this year, he's allowed almost 200 more receiving yards. He's allowed 5 touchdowns. His passes defense number is way down, and that's something that Justin and I talk about all the time when it comes to defensive backs. Getting their hands on the football is just the most important aspect of what they do. And you look at it, he had 4 as a rookie, again, respectable 4th pick, playing a lot of games. And then in 2022, again, you started to be like, oh, maybe this is 1 interception, 3 interceptions, 10 passes defense, 13 in 14 games. You want to be at about 1 a game. That's where you want to be if you're a good NFL corner. This year, he had 4 passes defense total. And it wasn't like they weren't targeting him.
No,
right?
He was being targeted.
And so, like, this is just a dude that, for whatever reason, fell short this year and became a guy that didn't have it.
Well, in fairness, I do applaud Marco for embracing as best he could the role that he was given on special teams. Unfortunately, he has not yet become like his athleticism. He's a guy who could be an absolute dog on special teams. I don't know if his ego would allow that because he's always been the guy on defense. Like he came in as and Florida's a starter, was starting as a freshman. He has the mentality of a number 1 corner, and that's different than the type of mentality you have to have, say, that Antonio Hamilton, who, he believes he's player number 54. So he even if he's starting, he still believes that they're trying to cut him. And so that's the way he attacks his job every single day, that he attacks special teams, he attacks every practice rep, and Marco just doesn't have that. I would hope that he can at least develop into a stud special teams player that can have, play another 8 years in the NFL, or ideally he can become a decent player, and then we can lament, well, the Cardinals coaches couldn't get out of him and someone else did.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, we always want these guys to succeed, and hopefully it's with Arizona, but at the same time, you look at it, you've got a guy who just with 2 coaching staffs, with 37 career starts. And again, the numbers don't have to be hard and fast, but like he should be around a certain amount. And for him to have 21 career plays on the ball is just in 37 starts. It's just a guy that lacks one of the key elements of being a good defensive player, and that's finding the ball when it's in the air. And that is what makes great players or great corners in this league. And so, it's definitely unfortunate. It's unfortunate in a number of ways, but the biggest one is obviously that they just desperately need something to work at that position. It's not working.
Yeah. Coming up next on the Rise of Seared podcast, Special Cardinals talking. We'll have one final little bit. Talk about the latest injury. Another one on the defensive line. That's coming up next on Rise of Seared. We're back on the Rise of Seared podcast, Special Cardinals talking the web, and we have yet another season-ending injury. Granted, the season-ending means 2 games, so hopefully it's not a serious injury. But Jonathan Ledbetter, his season is done, which means all 4 of the Cardinals' best defensive linemen finished the season on injured reserve. LJ Collier, Carlos Watkins, Lecky Fotu, and now Jonathan Ledbetter. Final 2 games. That leaves Kevin Strong and Dante Stills as the only 2 defensive linemen remaining from the beginning of the season. That's incredible.
It's legitimately one of the more baffling things I can remember, man. And, you go out and you kind of just look at what's happened this year for this team and to see them genuinely not have, and I don't mean this to come off the wrong way, but just genuinely not have a guy that you can look at and be like, hey, this is a good football player, left along the defensive line is kind of baffling, is it not?
No, it's crazy how that particular position has been. We knew the defensive line was going to be great, but you had hope for the upside of Collier. You had veteran consistency from Carlos Watkins. You had, rotational guy. Jonathan Ledbetter coming into this season, he was perhaps the most consistent guy they had on the D-line last year. He was very consistent this year. He's nothing special, but, he could be back next year. He's going to be a restricted free agent. And so, but now your starting defensive line is going to be Kevin Strong, Dante Stills, and Roy Lopez or Naquan Jones. That's not inspiring.
No, and it's just unfortunate that one position, that's why I said I've genuinely never seen one position group just take such a hit. It's crazy to see it. And
considering how thin they were, we knew going into the season, that was a thin position in terms of talent.
Yeah, and just to see it get tested and then tested again is just, it's crazy, man, that's how it's played out this year. And I mean, I couldn't have dreamed up in my wildest dreams that this would have happened.
Only the Cardinals. Oh, we'll have to wait and see. I hope it's not a serious injury. Hopefully it's just one of those things that, hey, he hurt his knee and he wasn't going to play the last 2 games of the season because it's just, a sprain. Hopefully it's not something serious, especially because he's not under contract next year. Restricted free agent, meaning that the Cardinals, if they decide to tender him, would bring him back at $2-point-something million. Yeah, then that's a bummer. Means more opportunities for Dante Stills and Kevin Strong. Hopefully they're both healthy. But DeAndre Swift and Ken Walker over the next 2 weeks. Good luck. So we're down. So we're down. Not only that, down their 4 best defensive linemen, their 2 best linebackers, and they're playing rookies.
Yeah, it's just
quarterback.
It's just so absurd that this is where this team is, man. That this is. I've never seen anything like this, and to see them in a position where they don't even have an NFL caliber starter at this juncture it's straight up baffling, man.
Yep. And with that, we will wrap up this edition, episode 500 of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Mr. Cardinals Talk on the Web. Seth will be back later this week, and hopefully I can get something set up as we prepare for the Cardinals and Eagles in Week 17, a game that, while I think is, of the 3 that they had left, I think this is the game where they might F around it and win, not because I think that they can actually compete with the Eagles. It's just one of those things that would happen. But, that defense, the Cardinals defense going up against that offense of the Eagles. Good night. DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell, they're going to rush for 300 yards, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think that 250 to 300 yards between Swift, Gainwell, and Jalen Hurts. Yeah, it's gonna be an ugly one.
We'll talk about that later this week. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening, as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up Red Sea, Be Red C-Red, and of course, Rise Up C-Red.
Roll!